In this segment, we're going to work through an Irving Berlin tune, How Deep is the Ocean? And with me to work through the tune is my good friend, Andy LaVerne. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Scott.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
It's nice to see you again. This is a nice tune. Irving Berlin tune, obviously, has been around. It amazes me the age of some of these tunes and how well they stand the test of time.
These tunes, they were all written maybe in the 30s, the 40s, most of them for movies or for Broadway shows. And they really have, as you say, stood the test of time.
It's amazing. What's kind of fun is, you see the absolute original chord changes. They're pretty straight up and down changes, but throughout, the wonderful history of American popular music, they've kind of been molded and moved and juked and jived a little bit, and jazz players have kind of taken it over and done it. And it's kind of one of the neat things about our art form, I think. It's a cool thing. It's a living, breathing thing instead of something, a snapshot in time. It just keeps getting better.
Right, and these tunes keep evolving as people keep playing them. There are new versions of the tunes.
So you feel like even since you've been playing these tunes, you keep learning new changes?
Absolutely.
And how do you normally learn those new changes? That's a good question.
Well, that's a good question in itself. From recordings, maybe from recordings like from listening to Bill Evans or listening to Chick Corea. They've both recorded this tune, and they have very startlingly different versions of the tune. They're both great, but they approach it from a whole different vantage point. So you can get ideas from Bill, you can get ideas from Chick, or whoever else you're listening to.
But it really gets down to listening.
I think the answer to all the questions in music really is found in the music itself. So a lot of times the analysis, I think, comes after the fact.
Neat.
But it's also good to know some nuts and bolts.
Not to head off on a tangent that way either, but that is an interesting point. You just bring that up, and sometimes I almost feel that way about a lot of the jazz improvisation texts and all. Sometimes I almost think you can at some point, it all needs to come out human and then get analyzed as opposed to the other way around. Sometimes it's not very formulaic, and sometimes I think we try to make it formulaic.
That's right, and I think when you hear players that are approaching it that way, they do sound more formulaic than natural. If you go back and listen to Bud Powell, he sounds very natural and relaxed, and then you hear somebody trying to play like Bud Powell, and it kind of sounds the same, but it doesn't have the same intent.
Probably that just the emotion of it coming out freely isn't there anymore.
Exactly.
Now, Frank Sinatra had a big hit on this tune, and before we started taping, you told me a funny story. I'd love for you to share it with our viewers.
Yeah, I was in the interesting position of I played with Frank Sinatra. This was like in the early 70s when I was in the Woody Herman Band. Frank Sinatra hired the Woody Herman Band to do a 6-week tour of the entire country with him that culminated in Madison Square Garden in New York.
Wow.
And that was a TV show that was on, I think, ABC at that time.
Yeah.
And actually, they've made that into a DVD, so I have actual proof. Although you wouldn't recognize me because my hair was, long, and I had hair at that time.
Well, I have a license to talk about that. That's right. Exactly right.
But it was a great experience. It was really exciting. I mean, every place we went was completely jam-packed. Tens of thousands of people screaming at the top of their lungs the whole show. And
at that age, and I should know this probably, was Frank still in his prime, or was he?
He was, I think he was in his prime.
Oh, that's great.
He sounded absolutely great. And I got to speak to him a little bit. And at one point, when we were first rehearsing, I wasn't sure, how much I could play and not play. And so I ran into Frank in the dressing room and I said, how much, what would you like me to do, behind you? And he said, well, play whatever you want to play.
Oh, nice.
So which really made me relax. It was great.
That's great. Yeah. Boy, no one has better phrasing and all that.
Phrasing is
and back to our talk about natural, right?
Yeah.
He certainly never studied improv.
That's right.
No one ever taught him. It's as human as it could possibly be.
Phrasing and time, his feel, everything was just fantastic.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you what, we're chatting about it. Let's hear some of this tune. Why don't you play a few measures and we'll... Now, let's go back a step and say, our viewers will have said we know what a lead sheet is. We know about playing the chords, but clearly, you're doing a lot more than all that.
Right.
What's maybe a first step, up the ladder from single chords in the left hand, single melody in the right? If you were going to teach me and I was your student and I could do that, what would you say, Scott? Here's a nice first little shove off the cliff.
Yeah, maybe adding some other notes to, instead of, well, actually, right here you do have just chord tones, root, and third and seventh. So it's not that complicated. If you add one more note, maybe get a little more color in it. So I'm adding little approach notes to the chords themselves.
Okay. Along with the melody, kind of embellishing.
Along with the melody, right.
Embellishing the melody.
That's
with
right.
it.
So instead of just playing a single melody in the top here, you can add more notes. And I'm playing other chords to approach chords as well. So.
Any simple thing you can do that way? I mean, as far as approaching it, if like I know at some point it's come out and you can agree or disagree. Maybe you'll say no, you don't like that, but like whatever chord you're really trying to get to, maybe getting to it from a half step away.
Sure, absolutely, a half step.
Yeah, and it sounds really.
It sounds like you're adding a lot, but you're not really. You're just taking the chord changes themselves, going up one half step and approaching each chord that way.
Okay, it's kind of taking the whole chord the same way we'd normally just slide up on a melody note to sound kind of hipper or more stylistically correct, and instead of just doing the melody, do the whole chord and get up. Now, any preference going up versus down?
I think approaching it from a chord that's above is a little more usual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the opposite of how we normally embellish a melody line, where you're normally sliding up to a note.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Instead of something like that, you're sliding down.
And the minute you play it, that sounds real obvious to your ears.
Yeah.
As always, whatever your ear likes the best.
That's
right.
right.
How we do that. Okay, let's keep stepping forward then. So once you've done that, how do you move forward? Maybe let's step into this one, especially on a tune like this. Well, these tunes aren't really rhythmically, it's not like you're playing a Latin tune where there's this real obvious thing to lay on top of it. How do you start interpreting tunes like this? Do you try to internally think, well, I'm going to do this as a swing, or thoughts that way? Anything
you can approach this tune as a ballad or as a medium swing tune or even an up tune. So when I'm playing solo piano, maybe initially what I'd like to do is to start more rubato, which means not a steady pulse. So I can interpret the melody a little bit more. So.
It's like conducting your own orchestra. You're really just slowing down, picking it up, doing it that way. Just for a couple measures so we can get our ear. So if you're doing this as an up tune, what would it sound like?
Yeah.
Just a couple measures. Just want to hear. Okay, and that's just a good A-B to hear those two things together that way. All right. Well, listen, let's hear you play this tune.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you play the whole thing through, and I'll be keeping my eyes out for some of those shifting chords.
Okay.
Some of those things. We'll see if we can pluck some of those out and maybe let the fog clear a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy.
Sure.
Yeah, man, that's great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for helping us out.
My pleasure, Scott.
Mm-hmm.